de hedendaagse tendens waarbij mensen verantwoordelijk gesteld worden voor alles in hun leven. Hun succes en vanzelfsprekend ook hun professionele of persoonlijke falen. Die gedachten uit deze lezing vormden een uitgangspunt voor zijn boek Identiteit en voor zijn waanzinnige populariteit die hem al meer dan een jaar doorheen de Vlaamse en de Nederlandse vlakten voeren om een pleidooi te houden tegen onze neoliberale samenleving en om te wijzen op de gevaren die dit systeem inhouden voor ons zijn en voor ons welzijn. Die oorspronkelijke tekst kunt u nog nalezen in ons jaarboek De Mens, de maat van alle dingen, die naast ons nieuwe boek ook te koop wordt aangeboden na de lezing. Een zo mogelijk nog grotere populariteit viel Dirk de Wachter te beurt toen hij vorig jaar zijn lezing kwam geven over borderline times. De zaal was letterlijk niet groot genoeg. De diagnose van de Wachter was zo mogelijk nog harder. Onze postkapitalistische neoliberale samenleving heeft ertoe geleid dat mensen op zo'n manier functioneren dat ze de meeste kenmerken van de persoonlijkheidsstoornis borderline op zichzelf kunnen toepassen. In mijn onderzoek naar sprekers over onze hedendaagse verhouding ten aanzien van tijd botste ik op het tijdschrift Gonzo op een essay van Mark Fisher getiteld Time Wars, waarin een vergelijkbare maatschappijkritiek wordt geformuleerd als bij Vragen en in mindere mate, maar toch ook enigszins de Wachter, maar waarbij Mark Fisher meer expliciet ingaat op de wijze waarop dit alles van impact is op onze tijdservaring en op de wijze waarop wij met werktijd, vrije tijd omgaan. Meer dan Vragen en de Wachter zoomt Fischers cultuurkritiek in op de impact van onze cybercultuur op onze tijdsbeleving. Fischer stelt zich prikkelende vragen als: wat heeft Facebook voor invloed op de wijze waarop wij leven en op onze identiteit? Wat is de impact van een gratis laptop of tablet die onze werkgever ons meegeeft op onze vrije tijdsbeleving en op onze arbeidsethos? Wat doet het voortdurend onderbreken van onze aandacht door tweets, beeps en ander digitaal gekwetter met onze geest en vooral ook met ons gemoed? En wat is het verband tussen verveling en neoliberalisme? Over de impact van digitalisering op ons leven kwam vorig jaar de IT-goeroe Peter Ginsen zijn lezing geven getiteld Digitaal is het nieuwe normaal. En hij heeft ook een boek met dezelfde titel. Ginsen legt daarin met een ongeëvenaard optimisme uit hoe onze hedendaagse samenleving en ook ons particuliere bestaan zal evolueren in een wereld vol uitdagingen en om ons succesvol en wellicht ook gelukkig te maken met onze continuous partial attention, zoals dat dan heet. En hoe wij ons zullen begeven in de digitale wereld, voortgestouwd door een nimmer afnemende drang naar en van innovatie, informatie, integratie en intelligentie. Laverend door de voortdurend verschuivende netwerken om ons gedeeltelijk te concentreren met een maximumboog weliswaar van maximaal 140, spanningsboog van maximaal 140 tekens in de ongemeen uitdagende wereld van VUCA. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity en ambiguity. Moest u niet bekend zijn met dit woord. Het zijn, om de woorden van Ginsen te gebruiken, allemaal grote challenges en opportunities tot behavioral changes. Het is maar de vraag of al deze veranderingen beperkt blijven tot behavioral changes. Meer zelfs, zijn het behavioral changes waarop we wachten? Mensen als Verhagen en de Wachter tonen aan dat er meer aan de hand is. En dat is ook het geval voor onze spreker van vandaag. At this point, I would like to present you the guest of tonight, Professor Mark Fisher. First of all, Mr. Fisher, I would like to thank you for accepting our invitation and being here. We are very grateful that you were able and willing to come to Gent, especially because I understood out of our email conversation that you are a very busy man, and more precisely, you are just as most of us suffering from a chronic and continuous lack of time. And you're very active in digital life through different blogs. So we are happy to have you here in real life. Thank you for coming. I'm almost finished. Because of this, and because of what I read in Time Wars and Konzo magazine, and what I know about the writings of Mr. Fischers, I know he's the right man to talk about the impact of technology and our changes and changing perception of time. Mark Fisher is the author of Capitalist Realism and the forthcoming Ghost of My Life, writing on depression, ontology, and lost futures. He is a commissioner editor at Zero Books, and his writing has appeared in a variety of publications, including The Garden, Film Quarterly, Sight and Sound. He is a program leader of the MA in Oral and Visual Cultures at Goldsmiths, University of London, and a lecturer at the University of East London. Dear Mark, the floor is yours to talk about Cybertime crisis.
Well, thanks, Sophie, for inviting me, and thanks to everyone for coming tonight. As you can hear, I've got a bit of a cold, which is partly dragged on because I was unable to take any time off. I also apologize for speaking in English, because I can't really get used to coming. I think it's weird to come to someone else's country and speak in my language and make you talk in it as well. But anyway, I have to get used to that, I suppose. An error already. But you're very fortunate. This is about the first lecture in about years that I've actually had time to do a PowerPoint for. I'm not going to make many jokes about having no time, etc., because they quickly become tiresome. But there's an error in this, really, which is that there should be a hyphen between cyberspace and time. Because in a way, what I'm trying to point to with this notion of cyberspace-time crisis is really we talk about cyberspace, a term that was derived from the cyberpunk novelist William Gibson, actually. We talk about cyberspace, but really I think that a lot of the issues now that we're living through are to do with cyberspace-time. The temporality that is imposed by cyberspace. And I use the term cyberspace deliberately as opposed to the internet. Actually, now, because I think we've reached a pitch now, a new pitch with smartphones, the arrival of smartphones. That's a new threshold over which we've gone. If you think back to the key developments, the emergence of the widespread emergence of the internet in the 90s. Still, while most people had started to become aware of the internet, it was a sideline of life, really, at that point, still in the 90s. What shifted that over was the big threshold switch into broadband. When people stopped using dial-up connections to the internet, and instead you could have the internet on all times. Everything really, that was the first major threshold, I think, towards where we are now. I mean. But I think smartphones just take us into another threshold, really, where you have to opt out of cyberspace. You see, if you think about the 90s, for some of you, there's probably a very distant memory, and when one had to dial up the internet, and I noticed a number of people of my age now quite nostalgic for that period, actually. But that was when the internet was good, when you could contain it, when it was a resource, when you went to the internet for things and you could take them away. Now, like I say, as soon as you've got a handheld internet-connected device, then you have to opt out of being in cyberspace at all times. That changes our perception of everything. It changes our perception of time. And particularly then, it changes our perception of time. It induces, particularly via social media. And I think Facebook's kind of old-fashioned now. Facebook's almost a genteel kind of old school, mid, sort of late 2000s kind of model of the internet. With Twitter, I think, which will itself soon be superseded, no doubt. But with Twitter, you've got this panic temporality. And I'll just tell you a personal anecdote about this, which was in the summer, for many years I've been working precariously, which was that I make up my income out of a number of sources, one of which would be hourly paid teaching. It was only like in December, January that I got permanent contracts, which changed things around. That's why you've got a PowerPoint today, because I had time to do it. Which you know, when you're precarious, i.e., when you're required to think like a self-employed person, an entrepreneur at all times, any time you're not making money, you think you're wasting time. So you have effectively no time off. You of course take time off because the organism can't. The human organism hasn't reached the stage yet where it can work. So, all of the waking hours available. Of course, one takes time off, but one does so feeling guilty at all the time one has taken off, because you're losing money. And in that state of kind of constant and permanent anxiety that you feel as a self-employed person, because it reminds me of an old joke. I think it was an American comedian called Rita Rudner who made this joke about when sort of tramps and homeless people ask, have you got any spare change? He would say, I don't know, I haven't lived my life yet. And it's the same with time. It's the same with making money when you're self-employed. How much money is enough money to be secure? There's never enough, because you might at any point completely lose all of your forms of income. So this state of entrepreneurialism, mandatory entrepreneurialism, which certainly extends to precarious workers, but I think there's a more general form of precarity, as I found when I've moved into permanent employment, where we're now required to hustle and market ourselves, even when we've got ostensibly permanent jobs. This is the background kind of condition of lives under neoliberalism. And of course, you're lucky living here, not in the intense lab of neoliberalism that is the UK and is London specifically. The vast kind of inertial frenzy of London. Like London and cyberspace are metaphors for each other in lots of ways, I think. An inertial frenzy where it just there's a frenzy of activity where nothing really happens. That's London. And why? Because we've all been deprived of the most minimal sense of security now. We're all hustling all the time. We're hustling, we're promoting. We're all literally running around. Okay, so this is important, because we're not just talking about technology here. That's the important thing. I mean, the missing word you could say here was capitalism, capitalist cyberspace-time crisis. Because this isn't simply about this. It isn't simply about technology. It isn't simply about the good old days, before technology arrived and ruined things. And shouldn't we go back to artisanal, locally baked bread made by peasants out of organic, wool or whatever. No, it's not, and it's definitely not about that. But it is about. I mean, I think one question we have to ask ourselves is, why are we now so obsessed with communication? I can tell you, phone calls and letters in the 90s didn't occupy that much of my time. A phone call. If I got a phone call from a friend, it might be nice. If I got a letter, quite nice maybe. But I didn't follow the postman around all day looking for a letter. But you see, I think what's happened is that we now, for reasons that are not accidental, we now equate technology with communications technology. And that kind of bullies us into this position whereby, you're opposed to iPhones and cyberspace. That means you must be an anti-technological nostalgic who wants to go back to living in, go back to hand-woven craft or something like that. No, it's specifically about what Jody Dean calls communicative capitalism. And we have to think of why is the case that communication has become unmoored from any other purpose apart from itself. You can say, that there was, cybernetics as a science was the study of, communication and control. That's defined by Norbert Wiener when he invented the term in the 40s. But now we have control by communication, I would argue. And I think some of the best theorists on this writing in the 70s, actually. And I would say Jean Baudrillard, if you read back his texts about communication, the onset of communication, that these texts are amazing. These texts now, read Baudrillard's text, The Ecstasy of Communication, which I think has maybe come out either late 70s or early 80s, a bloody long time ago. And this is basically a description of what it is to be on Twitter. You know, where if you read these texts, they're all about that constant, the inability to construct a coherent self anymore in the face of this constant input, instantaneity, a kind of schizo-subjectivity, as Baudrillard puts it, which has no halo of private protection anymore. This was what and when you go back to read these texts of Baudrillard, you think, what was he seeing in his own day with the bloody French Minitel system and in the 80s where you could barely make a phone call? You know, it's almost like he time traveled into our period and was writing about that in lots of ways. Because what we're talking about then is a synergy between, and a really bad one, between the imperatives of the dominant form of capitalism now and certain communication technologies. A synergy between those two things. And that's why I'm saying that I think Twitter is much more, Twitter is now the leading edge, not Facebook. I mean, because of this screaming low-level panic that is just a feature of being on Twitter. Yeah, and just to come back to the story of this multiply embedded story I was saying about, so I'd been, as I say, precarious, and what I was looking forward to then was, for the first time in years, I'd summer off. A summer off where I didn't have to go around and do, lots of freelance writing in order to pay the rent for the summer. So I thought, great, these Elysian fields of time open up, where finally I'll be able to pursue my own writing projects at last. And that sadly didn't happen. That sadly didn't happen. Why? Because I basically collapsed. I was in the summer. I was unable to work. I fell into a kind of stupor, depression. And there's a kind of doubleness to that depression. One was, I can't work now, I'm so exhausted, I've got no thoughts in my brain is boiled dry. And secondly, I felt really bad about that because I thought that was the only time I was going to have available to actually get any writing done this year, because we'll be back to teaching in September, October time. And part of that was, and also I was on Twitter a lot at this point. In a way, it got to the stage with Twitter where the whole of my interaction with the world was mediated by Twitter, first of all. Now, this is really an odd situation for me, because years ago I took comments off my blog. I don't read comments ever, not only on my own stuff but on other people's work. I regarded comments as a form of graffiti, which I have to, which you're subject to when you read work online. I think there's serious problems with the whole comment culture, actually, which maybe you can come back to. But somehow I've been suckered into mediating everything through Twitter. And what is Twitter? Twitter is just a comments box for the world, And so I was in this state of not being able to work, feeling very depressed. My brain not capable of forming new thoughts at all, and I was on Twitter, and Twitter is full of and I follow a lot of left-wing people, as you might expect, left-wing people and sort of anarchists and all this, and following them, left-wingers are very depressing a lot of the time. Particularly like British ones, British, really depressing, and it was this. What I found was this constant call to be outraged about things, this constant as soon as I'd get up in the morning and go to, of course the first thing you do is go, check my phone. Right, the first thing you do is, what messages have I got? Have we got any ads on Twitter? Have we got, have we got anything come through on Facebook? And actually there's a good new book that come out on Verso, about this, about sleep, by Jonathan Crary, called 24/7, where Crary argues that even sleep is the last frontier of capitalism. And that, that's what they really want to do is eliminate. People are sleeping less now anyway, and increasingly people are getting up in the night to check their mobile devices. So even this picture will soon become genteel of the first thing you do is go to your mobile device. And the first thing you do, you go to a mobile device, check it in that kind of excited panic in which we do this kind of thing, and immediately feel this heavy weariness come over you, the weariness of the demands of cyberspace. The demands of cyberspace which are literally infinite, and which, you switch it on, you go on Twitter, right, read this, be outraged about that. There's something else we've got to be outraged about. And of course with Twitter, you're always in this reactive panic time, because a lot of the time on Twitter, you're struggling to find out what it is that the original topic is. So you spend a lot of time scrolling back down. What are they talking about here? What's this about? Why is this person trending? And this low-level panic, which of course is exacerbated by the actual shitness of the mobile interface. Just think how crap these machines are, how ill-suited for purpose. Like, if you look, just think about it, think about it. Like, everything like, I think Deleuze and Guattari, particularly Guattari, argued about the plasticity of libido. That, there's no natural drives in human beings. You can produce desire out of any kind of assemblage. This is fully vindicated by the whole thing with mobile phones. And smartphones. I noticed in Europe much less than in London. World capital of control addicts and kind of cyberspatial misery. Where if you go to London, like everybody, and I mean almost without exception, is looking at their screens almost all of the time. And so what you've had, and think about that, that's a massive behavioral change in the human population over the course of not even a decade. When do people start doing that? Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, looking at tiny screens. And this is what everyone's doing. They're not reading books. They're reading newspaper quickly, but quickly get rid of that. Let's get to important business of looking at this really tiny screen. This really tiny screen that you can't really see properly. That's what I mean about the crapness of it. And touchscreen things are worst of all. They sort of slide out. The kind of bleary. You've replaced this crisp digital interface, the keyboard, with this kind of slimy, kind of idiotic interface, via touchscreen. Which is really difficult to use. It's not at all functional. So I was thinking about it the other day. It's like we're all in some weird game show where you have to send a message not really knowing in a really short amount of space, 140 characters, really quickly. And you're living like that all of the time. This is highly stressful, right? This is highly stressful. But that's not the kicker even. The kicker is that's not even the worst bit about it. We actually enjoy this. It's not that we're forced to do it. We're not forced to do it, not officially forced to do it, although some people are now required to do Twitter for work. We're not forced to do it, we enjoy it. And and the banality of this enjoyment, the banality of it. What are you going to get out of, Sherry Turkle's book, Alone Together, I'd recommend it highly on this. MIT psychologist, former kind of very much cyber-positive person, who wrote a number of other previous books, really just, about saying there's nothing to really fear from cyberspace and new technologies. Her latest book, Alone Together, then, is really about, it's partly, the first bit is about robots and the way that, particularly in places like Japan, they're now being used in care homes, etc., etc. That's interesting, but it's less interesting to me than the second part, which is about the use of technology, the use of these communication technologies, particularly by young people. Where she will report that it's routine for people to check texts even when they're driving. The insanity of that. You pretty much know that a text is going to be banal. It's only got 140 characters in it. Right, so people are risking their lives and those of others for a 140 character message. Why? Because it's a form of addiction. A form of addiction and compulsion. And something which you have to think about how bad this is, that really is snatching away all of our lives. Snatching away all of our lives. And certainly with me and Twitter, that my relationship to Twitter was getting to the stage where, basically life outside Twitter was just fodder for Twitter. So you your whole of your frame of mind was thinking, how can I convert any possible experience I've got into 140 character quip? And I then realized that this is just too much. Or I didn't realize it. After a period of exhaustion, and compounded, as I say, by this insomniac kind of pressure of Twitter. After a period of exhaustion, I emerged from the kind of depression with ideas flowing again. And then I thought, this can't live like this anymore. I can't live like, I've got to actually contain. I'm not going to withdraw from this cyberspace, but I have to contain it. And so, what I think we may come to see this period of communication communication binging is precisely that, as a form of binging. It's just like speed, like amphetamine. In the 50s, doctors prescribed it for anything, particularly to women. You got a bit of anxiety, have some speed. Oh, you want to lose some weight, have some speed. It sort of worked, but then there was downsides of people getting up and cleaning the house at 3 in the morning and that kind of thing, And I think there's a very serious side to this kind of techno-amphetamine which we're on, and a constant panic kind of temporality that is imposed by this combination, as I said, of mandatory kind of entrepreneurialism arising from precarious working conditions and social conditions. But the sense that anything can be snatched away from us at any time, that things are just getting worse, and we've got to be grateful even for the small things that we have got. Years ago people had security, but that's all gone now. And, particularly for you, younger people mostly who are here today, this is a story you're told. Well, we had a bit of security and a nice life, but your life's going to be worse than ours. Sorry about that. This is the message, right? This is the message. And what you're going to have to do is compete with one another in order to, sorry about that. We just haven't got enough for all of you. Sorry, but you must compete with one another for the little bit that's going to be left in the future. And, this is a horrible picture, really. So that's half an hour, not even one slide yet. Well done. It's all going to plan. Okay, so I'm going to approach slightly from a different angle what I've said now, which is, I'm going to go to the second slide. Okay, now part of what I want to get onto is what is the opposition to this, actually? And one way of thinking about what's at stake now is in terms of forms of dreaming, you could say. That, one thing that what is called the real world, what is called reality, what counts as reality, is a form of collective dreaming. William Gibson's own term for cyberspace was a consensual hallucination. But all kind of any social system is a consensual hallucination of one kind or another, a dreaming. You can't we're not biological creatures who can just exist in some supposedly direct relation to the world. Whether it be language or the set of social relations or concepts which we carry with us, this is a virtuality, but it's also it's not just a question of language, words, it's also a question of stories and narratives. And these are forms of collective dreaming. And what is our dreaming now? And what will be the opposition to it? And what brought this into focus for me was a number of conversations with my friend and collaborator Justin Barton, who offered this opposition really between lucidity and urgency. And one of the best examples of this kind of this collective lucid dreaming is a little-known book by Christopher Priest from 1977, I think, called A Dream of Wessex. Priest you may know because his book, The Prestige, was adapted by Christopher Nolan. And I believe that A Dream of Wessex is a kind of inspiration for Inception as well. But Inception goes over to the other side very much. And what Dream of Wessex is about is this very strangely lyrical and powerful book. It's a kind of anticipation of Gibson's Cyberspace, 5 or 6 years before Gibson actually wrote it. But what we can feel is the difference between Priest writing in a social democratic Britain in the 70s, albeit a social democracy which was falling into crisis in the late 70s. We'd had punk in 76, we got Thatcher arriving in 79, and it was between those two moments in lots of ways. And what it's about is a government program for collective a kind of collective dreaming. And what it is a kind of simulation of the future, of what the future would have been, a projected future from 1977. Partly then as an ostensible research project. So people go into this simulation and they live in this future, and then they're supposed to report back what this future is like. The future that they live in is one in which there's a Soviet government in Britain, and also Britain has converted to Islam. It's almost the total inversion of the world we're in, actually, the European world we're in, which is Islamophobic and defined by really the absence of the Soviet Empire. But I won't go too much into the book, but I would recommend it highly. But what is kind of interesting about it is the way in which people become hooked on that world. The quality, and it's almost that is the background to the world, is the Soviet bureaucracy. But the actual temporality of the world, the feel of the world, is a kind of Mediterranean, kind of countercultural idyll, where people have time to, where time unfolds very slowly, languidly, etc., etc. Priest draws this very lyrically. So of course people don't want to go back to the dismal, rainy Britain of 1977. That's a problem. They always want to stay inside the simulation. And interestingly, how people got out of how they all have to come out at certain points, and how they got out is by use of mirrors, little mirrors. When they see these tiny mirrors and the light reflecting in them, it's to kind of knocks them out of their trance, and they remember that they have sort of bodies in miserable Britain of 1977. I think there's lots of things that interest me about that book. One of which is this sense of a lucid exploration of a terrain. The sense of, and again, that sense of an unhurried time. A time not where people do nothing, but a time where people are capable of pursuing their own projects, where those projects are going to lead them. The opposite kind of text to this is Ishiguro. Ishiguro's unbelievably frustrating novel, The Unconsoled, aptly titled. If you want to, I've linked to. I did a short blog post on this, which I've linked to on the slides, and Sophie can give you the slides afterwards if you want to follow any of this up. With Ishiguro's novels, amazing kind of predictor of, I'm not sure when it came out, I think the 90s, predictor of the current temporality of the moment, where we live in at the moment, where it's about a pianist who comes to sort of vaguely defined Central European kind of country, and he's coming to play a concert, and all he wants to do is kind of rehearse for this concert. But I heard that this book was based. Ishiguro got his friends to tell him the dreams that they'd had, and it's almost entirely composed out of these dreams. So, and what happens is that the whole novel is like an endless anxiety dream, where the pianist can't get to prepare. The last thing he can do is perform, do the rehearsal. Or people suddenly coming in with these new urgencies, which immediately take over his life. Come on, you've got to do this. Then, when he's deflected by that urgency, then there's an embedded urgency within that urgency. Suddenly, this task he's been given, don't forget that now. You've got to do another one. and all the time there's this vague sense that I really shouldn't be doing this. I ought to be able to be doing what I'm officially here for, which is to rehearse for my piano recital this evening. But everything conspires to stop him doing that until right at the end. And I think this sense of being constantly deflected, of being in an anxiety dream, in other words, where we know we ought to be doing something but we can't do it, where there's something that we're supposed to be heading towards but we're blocked by it. We can't get there. There's always something which is stopping us. That sense of temporality that Ishiguro captures very well in this novel, I think, is the one in which most of us live almost all of the time now. And I think we can relate that to some really popular things. This from the Hunger Games. The Hunger Games, I think, is very powerful, and it's very encouraging, the success of the Hunger Games, I believe. The Hunger Games which was aimed at basically the same kind of audience for bloody Twilight or Harry Potter or whatever, but highly politicized, really, about exactly what I was talking about earlier, a world in which young people are sold out, where they're forced to fight with one another in artificial conditions of super competition to the death. It's a horrible image of life now, but an accurate one, I think, in lots of ways. And a sense of constant pursuit. There's no time to rest. You can't trust anybody. And that itself, that's not a natural condition arising out of human nature. It's something artificially produced by the games masters. And the artificial scarcity of time, resources, etc., that the Hunger Games involve. Another kind of similar image. This is from actually another Ishiguro novel, Never Let Me Go. This is a rare thing. It's a good British film. Like there's only about one every 20 years or something like that. This is Never Let Me Go with Andrew Garfield and Keira Knightley, astonishingly, in a non-annoying performance. Well, this is a horrible novel, actually. Ishiguro is a very powerful writer, I believe, about, partly about the misery of England, but also about this conditions of radical ontological precariousness. Never Let Me Go, it's a bit like The Island, that Hollywood film, where basically it's about clones who've been. There's the society in which there are these kind of underclass of clones, and these clones are sort of they don't realize they're clones until adult life, really, but they're educated separately, etc. And their role is to provide organs for the normal population, as it were. And there's a kind of horrible sadness about the film, because there's, unlike The Island, let's say, which is a similar premise about clones and the harvesting of organs for the general population, the clones not knowing who they are. Unlike with The Island, there's no police force, there's no military, there's no thriller element here. The clones conform because they've been trained to do it by ideology, by an ideological state apparatus, in Althusser's terms, which is the boarding school where they are educated. Yes, I won't say much more about that. But again, this artificially shortened lifespan which they've got, because they have to give up their organs to others, and most of them will only survive like 3 operations. So the horribly foreshortened sense of time, the sense of sell the kids for food. That's the line from Nirvana from years ago. That's the world we're in now, sadly. Another film is this is In Time with Justin Timberlake. I heard that Jay-Z told Justin Timberlake that for God's sake, start making records again. I'll be on your record if you'll stop making your really bad films. But I think that he's wrong about that. I think Justin Timberlake has done some really good performances and really powerful. One is in the Social Network. And I think also in this little-known film, In Time. In Time is about a society in which time, not money, is the currency, and where the poor are always minutes away from death. And because if you run out of time, then you're dead, of course. And the poor have got about like an hour or so. The rich have got like centuries of time to just sit around, sort of idle about. Whereas the poor are hustling all the time, rushing around just so that they can survive. Again, it's a kind of horribly accurate kind of dream version of the world in which we actually live, really. Okay, so what kind of urgencies do we face then, I think, now? One is, I think, Franco Berardi, Bifo, is very good on this, about the stress on the organisms, the tensions between the infinity of cyberspace and the finitude of the organism. The acceleration of information exchange, Berardi writes, has produced and is producing an effect of a pathological type on the individual human mind, and even more on the collective mind. Individuals are not in a position to process the immense and always growing mass of information that enters their computers, their cell phones, their television screens, their electronic diaries, and their heads. However, it seems indispensable to follow. Recognize, evaluate, process all this information if you want to be efficient, competitive, victorious. The necessary time for paying attention to the flux of information is lacking. There's that double thing which produces the intense weariness and exhaustion you feel not at the end of the day, but beginning of the day, as soon as you're on cyberspace, as soon as you're in cyberspace again, and you're being assailed with multiple demands immediately. It's a double thing if you know that it's actually impossible for you to deal with all of the demands that are made upon your attention, yet you feel that you ought to. Yet we feel we ought to. A friend of mine once pointed out, if it had in physical form all of the books which were recommended to him in like one day of being on, social networks, then of course you'd realize you couldn't possibly read those books. But there's something about the fact that it's in the form of links, recommendations online, etc., which somehow makes you feel guilty. I've got recommended to read 20 books today. I haven't read them. Oh God, I'm a total failure. Oh, how can I carry on living somehow? And of course that's not one day, it's every day and all time. Never stops, never stops. It's 24/7. If you've seen this film, Limitless, I think, which is very, very much about that. How do you cope with this? The book is actually better. The book is, if you've seen the film, you like the film, read the book, The Dark Fields, which is based on, which is much better than the film. The film's kind of happy compared to the novel. The novel's much bleaker than this, than the film. Again, this is how do you actually, this is a time crisis film, because essentially what the character wants is time. That's why he takes this drug. It's about a drug which massively enhances your capacity to do things, really. And effectively that means that you have more time. And how they render that in the film is that the lead character, played by Bradley, what's his name? Bradley Cooper, the guy from The Hangover and all of those things. He's really good. He's really good in Silver Linings Playbook as well, I think. But what he essentially wants is more time to do. That's what he gets out of this wonder drug which he takes, which is offered, which gives them the capacity to do many more things. And I think this speaks. The reason why this film resonates is because we all feel we're lacking time, and that we need to be more than one of us, which is how the film renders this extra capacity that the Bradley Cooper character sort of develops. But then there's also the kind of compulsion which I talked about before. And I think Jodie Dean is got some of the best stuff on this with her concept of communicative capitalism. Just reading, this is a quote from that piece that Sophie referred to at the top there, the Time Wars piece. But Jodie Dean has convincingly argued that digital communicative compulsion constitutes a capturing by a kind of Freudian Lacanian drive. This is not from that, actually. This is from another piece called The Privatization of Stress, which you might like to look at if you're interested in this stuff. This, if you sort of Google it, my name will come up straight away. Individuals are locked into repeating loops, aware that their activity is pointless, but nevertheless unable to desist. The ceaseless circulation of digital communication lies beyond the pleasure principle. The insatiable urge to check messages, email or Facebook is a compulsion akin to scratching an itch which gets worse the more one scratches it. Like all compulsions, this behavior feeds on dissatisfaction. If there are no messages, you feel disappointed and check again very quickly. But if there are messages, you also feel disappointed because no amount of messages is ever enough, and you also then feel the weight of those extra demands that the messages have placed upon you. And Sherry Turkle, as I talked about earlier, has talked to people who are unable to resist the urge to send and receive texts, even when they're driving a car. Okay, so as I said, then there's this part of the kind of why this is so paralyzing is the interlock of work and libido. You know, because my excuse for like carrying my phone around all the time, you know, even when I was out with my wife, would be, yeah, I've got to check it for work. You know, I've got to check it for work. And of course, that's partly true when I was in this condition of self-employment and permanent entrepreneurialism, et cetera, et cetera. But another anecdote, I think, which illustrates what's at stake here, the different drives that get kind of compacted together, one of which is the manual drive to just click stuff. There's a kind of emotional or affective drive, which is to, you know, to be recognized, to get information, to feel part of belonging of something. But there's also there's a manual drive, which is just to do the fingers themselves. When I first had my BlackBerry, which I had before my iPhone, I of course, got very quickly addicted to that. The red light coming on, alerting me. What's this? You know, anything in life could be stopped at any point. You know, as Baradi points out, you know, sex and even things which we think we'd enjoy. These are big distractions from checking our messages now. Jesus, hurry up, get it over with. Let's get back to the messages and the important things of life. And so what I was doing, I was out for dinner with my wife. I knew it wasn't socially acceptable to check, to have fiddled my BlackBerry on the table. Probably wouldn't feel that now, where it's much more normalized. So what I did was I had the BlackBerry under the table and let my fingers do the clicking motion, even though I couldn't see the screen. It's okay, my fingers were satisfied that they were clicking. So I think this kind of schizoanalytic point from Guattari about the desiring machines and like I say, these things that are clicked together, different kinds of drive, I think is fully illustrated by that kind of compulsion. But then with that, we have to sort of fit this into the broader political narrative, which is really work as religion. This comes out in Federico Campagna's work. His new book, The Last Night, just coming out on Zero. I can't recommend it enough. As really a major kind of updating of existentialism for the 21st century. Basic thesis of it is, we've got finite lives, we know there's no God, why do we waste our life working then? You know, I'm just going to, so I can skip through this, so I can get to the end of these slides, I'll just skip over this. His point being, you know, in the 19th century, anarchists were already calculating how much work you'd need to do in order to satisfy basic human needs and desires. And even then they were saying 20 hours a week. Now, with the massive increases in technology, this ought to be really vanishing. The amount of necessary work ought to be very small. Why are we doing more work than ever then? What's that about? There's clearly there's a kind of political economic drive which has nothing to do with the technological capacities of the human beings have got now. And I think that's partly to do with what I would call artificial precarity, which comes out in Breaking Bad, if you've seen that. I mean, you know, where, the power of Breaking Bad, really, the depressing thing about Breaking Bad, which if people haven't seen it, I mean, I guess some of you have seen it, you know, is about a chemistry school teacher in the US who gets lung cancer and who decides, well, I obviously can't pay for my healthcare, so I'll have to be, what should I do? Then I'll just start cooking crystal meth in order to pay for the health bills. And you know, I think this highlights, as it were, the evil. Well, I don't really want to use that. Use the word evil. It's too theological. It highlights, you know, what is so awful about neoliberalism the neoliberalism is a counter-progressive political development. Okay, how can we define progress in human life? Lots of ways it's very complicated, lots of ways it's simple. It is the capacity to limit the kind of arbitrary suffering of human beings to a minimum. Okay, and that's this lots of developments of the 20th century, did that. In the UK, Ken Loach's film, Spirit of 45, I think that's the twin of Breaking Bad in many ways. Where where Loach shows suddenly, after the Second World War in England, partly because of the war and partly also because of, organized working class movements, suddenly the working class could have this progressive modern agenda where they didn't have to pay for healthcare anymore. We didn't have to pay for doctors. That'll be provided for them. This is a progressive move, a civilized move, a move to increase civilization. Neoliberalism is a crude, a savage attack on civilization, a basic human progress. And that's the political background of Breaking Bad. And you've probably all seen those skits where they say, what if they had Breaking Bad in Canada, set in Canada, where you've got, or UK, where you've got, Mr. White, you've got lung cancer, your treatment starts next week, end of the series. Was it's perfectly possible to do that. You can't stop cancer yet, but we can eliminate some of the suffering that cancer causes and contain it. We have that capacity. It's an absolute crime that capacity is not used, and it's not nothing to do with the technological limits, the resource limits that are available to us. Those limits are artificially imposed. And another anecdote, which is even sadder than one I had before. Last year, I was diagnosed with cancer, but it turned out to be a misdiagnosis. But I lived with it for a month, and then that's part of a whole Kafkaesque comedy about the state of the National Health Service in the UK. Well, let's not go into that at the moment. But my immediate response to this diagnosis was not, oh my God, it's great, I get some time off work. To actually do, and I'm serious, it's not a joke, it's not a joke. People thought it was mad-like, it probably was, kind of deranged by the diagnosis, but my immediate response was, it's okay, now I'll have time to pursue my project to get a few weeks off work. Of course that was totally false, because I was precarious and I had no money to live on when I was ill. I didn't get paid anything. Well, I got paid very little from the places I was at. So this fantasy of illness was the only way out of mandatory kind of entrepreneurialism, I thought, but even illness doesn't provide that for precarious workers. Just going to rush through a bit. Everyone is Peggy now. Okay, what's that mean? Mad Men. One of the few things that I was able to do over the summer was catch up with major television programs of the 21st century, one of which was Mad Men. I only got to the first series, so don't tell me anything that happens after that. But one of the things that struck me watching Mad Men was the contrast really between a form of capitalism in the 60s, which merely kind of exploited and parasited creativity, as opposed to the form of capitalism we have now, which makes creativity virtually impossible. And that was kind of illustrated for me by the contrast between the main character, Don Draper, who is the creative, and there's this, scenes where the boss of the agency comes into Don Draper and says, Don, I can't really get over this. Every time I come into the office, you're just sitting there doing nothing. I can't see you doing anything. And I kind of thought, but the important thing is the boss then just leaves. He just goes, okay, get on with it. Impossible to imagine now. That scene now. Let's replay that scene now. Okay, someone's sitting in their office, and bear in mind, there's no computers. There's nothing in Don's office except a desk. That's it. Okay, there's no computers. There's his phone calls are fielded by Peggy, his secretary, etc. So it's basically got no distractions. He's sitting there. You can just think. Imagine that scene now. Well, one, you're just inundated by cyberspatial pressure in minute one. The boss comes in, and you're not seen to be doing work. Oh well, you've not got enough work. You're just sitting there. You're just sitting there. We've got to make some more work for you. Obviously, you're not working enough. And I think this echoes back to Berardi's point about the pressure on the social brain of always having things up to full capacity, of never allowing the social brain to idle. Because there's another scene where Peggy, who's Peggy starts off as a secretary, but she wants to be a copywriter, the more creative job. And Don says to her at one point, she asks for advice from Don, and Don says, well, Peggy, here's how it goes. You think very deeply about it. Think very deeply about it for a while, and then stop thinking about it. And then the answer will come to you. We don't have any time for that kind of idling anymore. The social brain is always occupied and inundated. So just think about that. You're like it, I'm like it. The whole collective social brain is paralyzed and unable to. That's why there's no creativity and why everything looks the same now. And we've not really seen much new or heard much new this whole 21st century, really. This is capitalism's version of equality. Of course, Don Draper was able to do that because there was a whole kind of patriarchal structure of his wife at home who'd cook his dinners for him, and Peggy at the front there who would kind of, do all his sort of boring administrative work. Well, so what does capitalism do? Does it say, okay, well, we want to make so that at least part of the time everyone can be Don? No, everyone's Peggy now. Everyone's Peggy. So we're all like, that's capitalism's version of inequality, of equality rather. Once men had a space of creativity, now no one does. And that's how capitalism does things, I think. So permanent insecurity, which I already talked about there. Quote from Richard Sennett. Relate to that this sense of indefinite postponement, that we never finish anything, and status is never validated. So even if you're a university lecturer now, you can't sort of sit back and think, that's it now, I've done all my kind of, I've done all the testing, I've done all the qualifications, now I can sit back and think and develop my ideas. Oh no, you can't. You've got to constantly prove your status via continuing professional development, by status reviews, all this kind of thing, by writing logbooks, aims and objectives, all this kind of nonsense, which has no purpose other than which is a purpose, and it's real purpose, to produce anxiety and disable people from agency or thought, really. I haven't got time to argue that now because I'm coming to the end, and I also want to just say some positive things, really. So what do we really want to do? I'm not given all this. This is a bad picture, but okay, we're in it now. That's how things are at the moment. There's no reason to think this will just carry on forever, and that it can carry on forever. So I think we need to be clear about what we want, which is this different sense of time. We need space in the culture which is not dominated by business and busyness. And what is work now? That's the other side of this. What is work now? What are the things that most of us do a lot of the time? We're not producing things that are actually useful to people or even desirable to people. A lot of what I would call work in my job, the things I don't like doing, is simple simulation of productivity, bureaucratic simulation, created by kind of managerialists whose job, the kind of parasites of institutions are real parasites, not immigrants, not people claiming unemployment benefit. The real parasites of our society, the very high earners who propagate all this stuff to keep us in a state of panicked anxiety, and radical competitive individualism, such that we can't act together and gain a collective agency. And so I think then what we want is a combination of security and adventure, to use a term from Federico. That we want security, and that there's a relation between these two things. That the big lie that has been sold to us by neoliberalism is that if we withdraw security from people, we draw kind of social security, then suddenly there'll be this creative, this wellspring of creativity will just emerge. Okay, well, all that happens if you remove security from people is they get like I was when I was self-employed. All of that creative energy goes into how can I make money? That's the energy of this society. That's a stupid thing for people to have to think about a lot of the time. And I mean, we can break out of that. So on the one side, security, on the other side, adventure. You know, security is the conditions for adventure. We can adventure, meaning entering into new spaces, new projects, new ideas, which you don't know where they're going. And I think there's a relation between those two things we must argue. So the most banal issues about funding, security, you know, funding of higher education, funding of, debates about basic income, etc. These are totally related to how we can revivify the creativity of a society. Because, you know, if we've got, the point you need more time, you need surplus time. And everyone under neoliberalism is forced to work to capacity and also to be seen to be working to capacity. That's what I'm saying. If you don't really have enough work, we don't have enough work because most of us aren't, most people aren't doing anything that's actually socially useful or desirable, like I said before. So then it's about looking at an appearance of work is now work. And, you know, and then there's meta work where you know, if you're a managerialist parasite, your job is to make work for other people. You know, and that's the kind of crazy world we're in now. So I think we need to pitch this as the problem. We need to argue for this. And like I say, there's an existential side to this. But there's a very practical side about the demands for funding ultimately, because time is money, or money is time, and money frees up time. And there's also things that we can do personally, and this is what I'm just going to end on, really. The things we can do personally are, after I got out of this kind of slough, this depression I was in the summer, I thought, that's it now, I'm not actually going to live like this anymore. So I did simple things, like I said, okay, what I'm going to do now, initially, is I'm only going to go on Twitter and Facebook on my desktop computer. So actually, there's a moment of actual kind of vertigo when I deleted from my iPad and my smartphone the apps of Facebook and Twitter, delete the apps. I said, okay, so initially what I'm going to do is going to have to go upstairs where my desktop is in order to go on these things. And you'd be surprised how quickly that dehabituates you from being on them all the time. And so then I sort of actually quite started to enjoy being on Facebook and Twitter then. Because, you know, if you only go on them like once or twice a day, there's a whole store of things that are there for you. You know, ready. Like you've got a lot of messages, you've got a few alerts, and that's quite nice. You have a bit of a chat, a bit of a break, have a bit of a chat for a while. Then you can go back to your actual fucking life, which isn't that. And then you can also go on there and actually talk about things which aren't it. Because you've actually had a life which is not this constant, what am I doing? You know, and where your whole life isn't, where your whole drive of your life isn't, how can I convert this experience into an 140-character quip, which I was getting like on Twitter. You know, any possible experience I had, what am I going to say about that on Twitter? Just a crazy kind of situation to have arisen. So, I mean, just those simple things worked in de-habituating myself from it. The fact that, and I'm not saying I don't now go on Twitter or Facebook on my phone, but the fact I have to make an extra click to do it, it's quite difficult and slightly annoying, and it doesn't really work the same when you go through the internet rather than off the apps, means that it just means that I don't fall into that temptation of having them on constantly as the background of my life. So I think that we can develop amongst ourselves a kind of, this is the problem of the phrase from Deleuze about the Guattari, about the right dose. We need the right dose of cyberspace, and we can develop kind of collective pragmatics of how we do that. And that's not a complete withdrawal, but a kind of partial withdrawal. We can do that, and we can also then be pursuing then these other more long-term political and social goals. And actually the two are related, because I found that since I've done that, my sense of time, my capacity to think has increased massively. Another thing I've done is print out things if I want to read them. Like I was saying to my students, okay, look, it's not just you. When you're reading something on a screen, you don't really read it. You know, because even if you don't actually click off the screen onto Facebook, Twitter, email, whatever, there's a screaming low-level panic in your brain going, click off this now. Don't really concentrate on this. There's much more interesting stuff out there than this. Whereas actually, if you print stuff out, it's a contract with yourself, you are going to read it. And it's actually, this produces this strangely calming effect now, actual print, where you can't click on it. You just got to read it. And it's actually quite a nice experience to go back to that kind of time, I think, in lots of ways. But I'll just leave it there, because there's obviously a lot more we could say. And we've taken up enough of your time. But okay, so Sophie is going to... Yeah.
Okay, Mark, thank you. Thank you for your expose. And yes, okay. Is my micro working? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I would like to address 4 issues. The problem is, once I start addressing the first, I go from, I'm mixing up all of them. So as first, I start with the issue of free will and free choice in your theory. Secondly, I would like to connect it to time, but not in a way of clock time, but in the sense of age. And I would like to make a differentiation between our generation and most of their generation. I think there is rather a difference there. And in the same, I would like to talk about the information overload, and then I would like to discuss 2, I'm not going to ask you for solutions, but I would like to address 2 things. Firstly, the role of narrativity and art in the cyberspace story, and secondly, what about slow movement and the moralization that is in there or elsewhere. So that's quite a lot. I'm going to go to comment. My first is rather a comment. If I understood you well, it's not about technology, the whole digital revolution, but it's about behavior, ideology, and more precisely neoliberalism. I cannot pronounce that, but you know what I mean, eh? Okay.
Even if I tried to say in Dutch.
I guess that if I understand you well, the problem, the core problem, or the underlying problem, is the problem of free will and free choice in these developments. So that the demands of cyberspace are dominating our personal will. You talk about compulsion, for example, and in a certain sense, I think I do agree with you. Cyberspace is more or less an ideology, and more precisely, it's a powerful tool of capitalism. But in my opinion, I would rather say it's a tool than that it is a capitalist system. And there are some things you can, it's just a matter of consumption. For example, the famous Nike running shoes, they trace wherever you go, and the information on where runners stop, the way they take when they go for their daily running, and so on. That's from a commercial point of view very interesting, and that is sold. So information, it's worth money. Eh? So in that sense, is the whole technological evolution indeed captured by capitalism? But I hope, and here's my comment, that we are not prisoned by the system. I do believe we can choose between Nike running shoes with a system that is tracking our every step we take, or we can choose not to watch TV. We can choose, as you also said at the end of your lecture, to limit the time we spend on internet, things like that. So I do believe that cyberspace is addictive, that it's difficult to choose. However, weed, alcohol is that as well. And sometimes when it's not well, sometimes there are circumstances that people do not choose personally, but even the laptop we get, I do believe that when our boss is giving us a laptop or a tablet, that we feel the pressure to work in the weekend, to check our emails and even to answer them. On the other hand, I do believe that if we resist and if we don't open our emails and we don't collectively answer the emails, then it's worth nothing, or it's just fun to have a laptop of your boss. So, and then now I'll give you the microphone. I do believe what you also said, we can break out of that. And I'm convinced that there's a big difference between the generation Y, as they are called, and our generation. I don't want to be rude, but I'm afraid we are a bit older than the majority of the people in here. As far as I know, a lot of young people, I do believe that they handle technology in another way than we do. But we were the first, of course, it has been a bigger intrusion in our personal life, because we were older when we got into the system, I think. And I also believe that young people, they are what they call digital natives. They are born into the digital world. They are used to see 3 or 4 screens at the same time and all that. So, in my experience, the load, the pressure on using digital devices is for young people much easier than it is for us. Or it is because I am very slowly. That's also a possibility. So please, the first thing, the free choice.
I'll answer both of these questions with the problem of depression. Like one, okay, I'm a Spinozist. I don't believe in free will as superstition. There's no such thing as free will, and that's very key to the Kabbalist ideology is free will. But that's not to say there's no agency, but agency isn't the same as free will. I believe in the great paradox from Spinoza that human beings are most in bondage when they think they're most free. Human beings are most compulsive when they think they're being free, and that I think from Spinoza, the standard picture you get is, but what is it to be a normal human being? It's to be the victim of compulsions of various kinds. Okay, freedom is an achievement. This is a point. This is a great value of Spinoza's thought. Freedom is not like Rousseau or something like that, where you start off free and then you're put into bondage by society, etc., etc. For Spinoza, you start off as an infant in a state of radical abjection, and what does that mean? That you cannot connect cause and effect. You have to learn that. For infants are bombarded with this kind of dreamy chaos of stimuli, which they have to learn to make into cause and effect. For Spinoza, freedom is the capacity to recognize the causal factors which impinge upon you. You become free only by recognizing the extent to which you're determined. The dominant neoliberal kind of model is to completely obfuscate all that. And so you're just free. And it's these lefties, the bureaucrats who want to control you and stop you. We just appeal to your free choice. Well, if there's a free choice, why is the Microsoft Word? The shittest fucking software thing ever. This is why. And if there's free choice, why do capitalists spend so much money on advertising and branding? Because they know that people, what they can appeal to, the very thing that most controls people is the appeal to the people's freedom, etc., etc. What inaugurates the world we live in now? 1984, the Apple advert, the famous Apple advert directed by Ridley Scott, which said, which was about, if you've not seen this, you should see it. It's really quite impressive piece of work by Ridley Scott, where you have, this world, is clearly based on Orwell, with these kind of grey drones sitting around, and along comes this kind of woman dressed in Apple colours, who's an athlete who throws this hammer into the big grey, dismal control screens, which both represent kind of IBM, those kind of big monolithic, forms of kind of old school technology companies, and also kind of the Soviet system or whatever. They're compacted together as representing the old world. The new world will be one where you're free to choose, where no one can tell you what to do. But why? But we're in a world where people are habituated kind of behaviours to an unbelievable degree. I'd say there is a difference between, my generation and young people, and that's simply that young people are deprived of things that I had. You know, they're deprived of time, they're deprived of an immense kind of cultural resource, of a vibrant kind of public service broadcasting that was in place in somewhere like the UK in 70s and 80s, which I took for granted. There's a very kind of serious music press, which I took for granted. All of these things, that's what made me what I am today. Just made me be able to come and speak here today. In addition to kind of full grants, you know, lack of precarity, et cetera, I had that. You don't have it. You've been deprived and it's been stolen from you. You know, and so what is the objective marker of this? Is the amount of depression amongst young people, which is increasing all of the time. If young people are so happy in this new world, and they're just you know, why are they so depressed? You know, and I would say, you know, depression. Just finally, depression, you know, which many young people suffer from, is the evidence of the accuracy of Spinoza's thought, that no one chooses to be depressed, as it were. And you know, when you are depressed, that you can't really choose your way out of this. That there's a kind of series of blocks, impasses, etc., which you can't get out of. And, you know, so it's mere voluntarism, mere choice is not enough. And the final thing is then, that doesn't mean there's no agency, though, but it means that, you know, it's only in very rare cases where we're out of the normal inundated flow, where we're able to exert our agency. I mean, the reason that is because I'd had a kind of mini breakdown, actually, over the summer, that I was able to get out of certain kind of habits and reimpose new habits. Because of the ceaseless flow, and also because, you know, I thought a lot about it, but who was thinking about it's no good. You know, and I was not able to act on it because I was under constant inundated pressure at all times. I was only able to act when there was a kind of breakdown. And I think that, you know, that because of the constant inundated pressure on the social brain all the time, that the capacity for that at a collective level is very limited. But that doesn't mean it couldn't happen. But I think we need to find a break somehow in this endless flow, inundated flow, in order that we can have agency as opposed to the illusion of free choice.
But yes, okay, then I do believe and I do agree that agency it's a more it's a better word than free choice. But anyway, resistance to the system. Don't you believe that there is resistance, especially? But then I give the word to the young people, because it's not us, the old ones, who have to say what's going on in their mind. But I do see a lot of young people resisting to the system, trying to find alternative ways of life. They are trying to live with less. They are searching co-housing systems, second-hand clothing. Last week it was also an issue in the discussion. But people do try to live young people do try to live in another way, more even than our generation does. But maybe I should ask you. We have a walking microphone. If people feel embarrassed about speaking in English, just ask in Dutch, and then we will try to translate as good as it is possible. Is that fine with you, Mark?
Yes,
we first give the words
yes, of course. It's your country.
It's my public. It's our youth. Jeroen, ik zie hier verschillende mensen van voren in elk geval die iets willen vragen. Or if you want just to react, that's also a possibility, of course.
Hi, I'm Thijs. I've been through some serious mess, and that makes you open your eyes, and I know you did too. And I see more than other people around me, and that's sometimes depressing, but yes, I can live with it. Yeah. But I understand your situation.
Do you want to react, or we just ask another question or a remark?
Well, I took that as a comment.
Yeah, as a comment, okay,
unless you
fine.
want a specific answer for that.
Somebody else?
I think there's someone here.
De tweede rij.
What I'm going to say, it's probably also a comment, but you said, Sophie, you said young people looking for alternatives, but I think
there are young people who are looking for alternatives.
Yeah, there are young people, but they are all pretenders in my point of view, because we can just ignore that our world is more involved in technology, and we're just trying to look for alternatives, but that's all pretending, because there is not going to be any alternatives, because this is how it goes. Technology, the evolution of technology goes further and further, and like in 10 years we have more advanced technology than now. What are you going to do? Still drink, like, I don't know, bio stuff? And I mean,
but there are, I mean, okay, I mean, I think you're being too hard on young people, really, to be honest. Like, you know, like, I think why the Hunger Games is powerful, because you know, it's obviously connected to a young audience, and it's a political message about the state of things today. And you know, it's not like vampire romance or whatever anymore. It's actually just a really hard story about what is happening at the moment. And you know, of course, I think you've got to start off from that heroic conditions in which young people live. They're terrible conditions. Just really, really terrible conditions. You know, I just can't impress this. You've been deprived of things. You've been deprived of things, and the things that you've been deprived of are being sold to you as benefits. It's a great new world. You've got all this. You've got all this stuff. You've got all this capacity to do things. It isn't. It just isn't like that. And what I would say is, look at the objective markers of this. You know, when I you know, and the world that sort of shaped me was one where young people were the leading edge of everything, and there's a strong association between young people and newness. And this was particularly the case, of course, with music, where you get how do you feel the sense of newness in your historical moment? You feel it through music, and young people would have created that music. Look at everything since 2003, I would say, approximately. No new sounds of any kind. No new sounds of any kind. Now, what can you say? This is a failure of this generation of young people. They're just not as creative as previous generations. No, you just have to say that there's something that's happened, that there's nothing different or lesser about young people now than ever before. In lots of ways, the sheer capacity to survive now, and not be in a state of mental breakdown, is a testament to the resilience of young people now. But you know, the conditions aren't good, but it doesn't mean that things will never change, right?
But it's not because we have lost a lot of things. Our generation has lost a lot of things, but it doesn't mean we have to go back in time. We have to improve it and go forward, because if we can just get a solution for this stuff, what is going to be in 20 years?
What does going forward mean, and whose temporality is this? Like, why, for instance, technology, let's be specific. It's not all forms of technology. Like, you know,
I'm not only
we're talking about communication. Communication technology is the thing that's taken over your life. Like most other technologies, like, you know, medical technologies have improved. Good. Right, that's good. Right, communication technology, why has that taken over your life? And why do you imagine that will persist forever? There are hard limits. There are hard limits of the organism. Like, which there's a certain degree of neuroplasticity, etc., and a certain, you know, capacity of, you know, younger people who are exposed to this earlier with their neurological apparatus, you know, is much more plastic than ours. But there are hard limits to that. You can't go on forever. You can't go on forever, like inundating the brain with more and more stimuli, and the human organism can cope with that. It's not possible to extrapolate from the cyber blitz of the last 10 decades, imagine that it will continue at the same rate of acceleration. It cannot. You know, so something will break. Something will break. I mean, Berardi's argument is an interesting one. He argues that the dot-com crash of the late 90s, the turn millennium, was caused by depression. Because the people couldn't, you know, okay, so for Berardi, the argument is, why did 90s was a decade of the emergence of cyberspace and of Prozac? And for him, there's two things that are totally related together. How did people cope with these new level of demands that were placed upon them? They started to take antidepressants, which are now very common, particularly amongst young people, antidepressants as a hazing thing, which you can hear this like this downer haze. That's why Drake is really interesting, the new Drake record. Full of this kind of electro downer haze. Everyone's on downers now to cope with just cyber blitz, whether it's antidepressants or other forms of kind of self-medication in order to cope with this. And the thing is that there's a breakdown at the end of the 90s, according to Berardi. There will be a breakdown. We cannot cope with this. We cannot cope with this forever. There will be, there's already the point is that there is this privatization of stress. It's normalized. The fact that young people are depressed, who gives a shit? This is the idea. Young people are depressed, that's just part of life. It wasn't part of life. It was not part of life. The increase of the depression amongst young people is shocking. And, that ought to be the biggest possible indicator and condemnation of the world in which we're now living. It wasn't normal for young people to be depressed in the 70s, let's say. But just to agree, you can't go back. We can't go back. But what we've got to be clear on that, whose sense of time are we talking about here? I don't want to go back to the 70s. I don't want to go back to commonplace racism, all that kind of thing, and whatever was kind of normal at that time. Equally, what we've got now as a result of, let's be clear about this, as a result of this frenzied overstimulation of the neural cortex of the collective brain. What we have, though, is not, let's not be clear, is not a massively accelerated culture, but a very slowed down culture, a very homogenous culture, a very predictable culture where nothing new ever happens. So I would think, yes, we want to go back to a future where new things happen, but you do that by de-binging of communication technology, which is a decelerant as a cultural influence, I would argue.
And is it not a matter of diversification as well? I mean, for example, I just give one example. They are going to build a new library here in Gent, and a library, it's to me associated with books. However, the IT divisions in libraries are having more and more importance. But it's also a tool to make young people enthusiasts for literature, for example. If you have a nice website, if you have good IC tools in order to enthusiasm people to read, for example, then, or like today, you're using PowerPoint with nice slides of nice books. And that's okay.
No one's calling for a total withdrawal from technology.
No, it's not. It's a matter of diversification. I think there is technology.
Well, the point is you don't get diversification as standard. What you've got is, look, has anyone seen that film Videodrome with David Cronenberg, 1983? It's basically a thing where the videos. There's this kind of cyber virus which passes via people watching stuff on videos. And, the lead character played by James Woods is infected by this kind of brain virus, which psychedelically destroys his sense of reality and turns him into a kind of homicidal schizophrenic. I'm sure we can all relate to that. But at the end of it, the James Woods character says to the head of the company which has propagated this stuff, well, how come it doesn't affect you? And of course he goes, well, we don't watch it. And I think that's the case, the people are running the world. They're not sitting there with 3 screens, trust me. They don't sit there with 3 screens, they sit like Don Draper, with lots of free time available. They want you to be running around in a state of panic, constantly, reacting to things. They're pushing all the buttons. They're not doing that, they just want you to think they're doing that. And, the point is that it doesn't come as standard. So that's what I mean about collective pragmatics of partial withdrawal. That's what I mean about people who were nostalgic for, I think increasingly nostalgic for that period when the internet was a resource, aside from life, where you had your projects, you went to the internet to record some of those projects to get some resources. You didn't live in it all of the time. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, the standard mode clearly is one in which that is the case, where you're addicted first and then we have to withdraw from that. But I don't want to go back to face-to-face communication, organic, locally produced stuff. That's just a part.
So no slow movement,
no,
taking time?
The right time is consistency versus cut-off, I put it that way.
Yeah.
It's not about slow versus fast, because we've got a slow, fast world where we've got massive kind of speed of stuff coming into us, producing inertial glacial slowness in culture. And so slowness is not an alternative to it. It's already there. What we have is, in a way, the difference between cut-up as a constant mode of a kind of incoherent and stimuli which cannot be montaged together, into a kind of totality, versus consistency. Well, consistency is, where one can be absorbed, one can, and an absorption time can feel really quick. When you're absorbed in something, when you're in a creative process or whatever, you feel something taken over you. You feel you're running to catch up with it. Time actually speeds up. I would say my sense of time, is, we're all like computers now whose memory is overloaded. So everything's slow and creaky. Everything's slow and creaky as I live in London, where you just, where even walking down the street it's an Odyssean quest. And there's an illusion because everyone's running around and something's happening there. But actually, they're running around, the more that people run around, the harder it is for anyone to actually get anything done, and the less you can achieve in time, I think. So that's what I would say about that. It's not about slow versus fast, it's about consistency and absorption.
Or what you call so nicely lucid explorations do we need versus urgencies. That's very nice. So do you want
to say it?
Jeroen? Yeah. The microphone, where is he?
I just wanted to say, so what you're basically saying is that I guess your generation or the previous generation was better because you had more time to pursue your own projects, and you also think that you were more creative, or the previous generation was more creative?
Oh, without doubt, yeah.
I don't think that's true. I just think that...
Show me.
I just don't think that's true. I think that there is an information overload, definitely. I just think it's harder now to pick out the very essential, very new creative ideas. But I just think that there's just more information.
That's not an argument. Show me actual hard evidence of what you're saying. Show me a new creative thing that didn't exist in the 20th century that actually emerged.
Well, I mean,
one thing in the 21st century.
Like Steve Jobs, you said that you don't think that that's something innovative or creative or whatever.
No, it's the parasite.
But I think it's very creative. It's something evolutionary, something new.
Well, one that came from the 20th century. Two, a lot of that was funded by the state and not by him. He just was like a tiny part of that.
But
so
he was the brains
he wasn't young,
behind it all.
Than me.
But also, you're saying that
no Jobs
people,
is like a Christ figure. You can't really attack him. But he was he just could sell stuff. He didn't even design it.
I just think that it gets harder to pick out the very creative things because maybe in the previous generation you didn't have that much information, so it was easier to find the creative things in between the whole mass of information. And also now, you're saying that our generation is more depressed, and I don't disagree, but also maybe they're depressed just because there's so much information and we're creative, but we actually realize that a lot of different people think the same way that we do and have the same ideas. Because sometimes you start a project and you think oh wow, I found something new out, and then you go look on the internet and you saw 100 other people already thought of that too. But so maybe then it undermines your creativity in your head. But
okay. But let's be clear about what I'm saying. Creativity isn't a property of individuals, ever. It's a property of a social or collective scene. So that it's not like the individuals are less creative than they used to be. That's just not how creativity works. Creativity is possible because of social conditions. And those social conditions have been removed. And all of the evidence, I would say, suggests that has had a massively deleterious effect on the production of novelty. Now, that argument is a fallacy. It's a basic fallacy. It's appeal to lack of contrary evidence, it's called. Where you can say, well, there might be this stuff out there, but we haven't seen it yet. Well, you can say there might be fairies at the bottom of the garden, we just haven't seen them yet. Of course, I would say, that if there was, just point to me one thing in music, let's say music alone, let's go on music. In the last 10 years, one single thing that couldn't have come out in the 20th century.
We are here in the conservatory, so
Just one example. Just one.
There has to be somewhere in this building one thing.
It won't be. This hasn't. It's just. It is over. Like it is. It's not and it's not a fault of. You can't go into free will. It's not the fault of people today that they're just not putting enough effort in. It's not that. It's not that they. That's not that they have this thing creativity which others previously had, which they now don't have. No, it's that the conditions for creativity are social and collective, and they have been destroyed. And that's what we can't imagine that culture will reliably deliver the same level of intensity throughout all history. If we've got political complaints about neoliberalism, they should be, if you say neoliberalism's bad, we can't assume, we have to take this seriously. That it is really bad, and that there's no sphere of life, culture, subjectivity, consciousness that is free of the effects of this political system. And that's and we might not like it. I don't like it. I don't want to be saying what I'm saying now. Trust me. But there's nothing about us that was good or better than you or anybody. It's just that we were lucky and you're unlucky. You live in the Hunger Games. We had social democracy. That's like, you should be angry about this, not kind of, in this weird case of, I see with some people, it's kind of temporal chauvinism, where you're kind of, our time's just as good as any other time. It isn't, it's a bad time. But and part of what makes it bad is this weird positivity that people feel they have to be in. And there's definitely a relationship between that mandatory positivity that young people are required to have. Be cheerful, be positive, make things for yourself, don't rely on all of this stuff, and the actual depression, which is clearly increasing amongst young people because they know they can't do those things. Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yes. I kind of get the feeling from hearing the two of you talk that sometimes you forget that we actually grew up in these massive changes. So I'm 24, I remember the computer, I remember the internet, getting introduced to our homes. I remember that. But at the same time, this was an exciting thing, and nobody knew what kind of effects that would be. And now it's like you expect us to get the whole concept and see all the flaws or have all the effects. Well, you basically say you got to wake up yourselves. Like, isn't it something the older generation should also take care of, or hand us some tools, or like how do you suggest what should our younger generation do to wake up?
Well, I think like you are the hope of everything. That's the point, that you can do things. But why ask me though? Like years ago, I think this is part of the problem. That young people are the leading edge of things, partly because they would take charge and set the agenda. Now, the very fact you're asking that question to if someone's gone wrong. Why are you asking me? That's you have to recover a sense of agency and control of the capacity for collective control of your own lives. But of course, I think that of course you're going to find that difficult because you may have seen the internet gradually introduced, but I know the situation is different in this country than the UK, but in the UK with young people, young people your age and up to 30 or whatever have never seen anything, have never experienced anything that isn't neoliberal domination, or what I've called capitalist realism. And of course that's really depressing. And this thing about alternatives. Of course, when we were growing up, there was a real which you can hear this like this downer haze. That's why Drake is really interesting. The new Drake record, full of this kind of electro downer haze. Everyone's on downers now to cope with the just cyber blitz, whether it's antidepressants or other forms of kind of self-medication, in order to cope with this. And the thing is that there's a breakdown at the end of the 90s, according to Berardi. There will be a breakdown. We cannot cope with this. We cannot cope with this forever. There will be there's already the point is that there is this privatization of stress. It's normalized. The fact that young people are depressed, who gives a shit? This is the idea. Young people are depressed, that's just part of life. It wasn't part of life. It was not part of life. The increase of the depression amongst young people is shocking. And, you know, that ought to be the biggest possible indicator and condemnation of the world in which we're now living. It wasn't normal for young people to be depressed in the 70s, let's say. But just to agree, you can't go back. We can't go back. But what we've got to be clear on that. Whose sense of time are we talking about here? I don't want to go back to the 70s. I don't want to go back to like commonplace racism, all that kind of thing, and whatever was kind of normal at that time. But equally, what we've got now as a result of, let's be clear about this, as a result of this frenzied overstimulation of the neural cortex of the collective brain. What we have, though, is not, let's not be clear, it's not a massively accelerated culture, but a very slowed down culture, a very homogenous culture, a very predictable culture where nothing new ever happens. So I would think, yes, we want to go back to a future where new things happen, but you do that by de-binging of communication technology, which is a decelerant as a cultural influence, I would argue.
And is it not a matter of diversification as well? I mean, for example, I just give one example. They are going to build a new library here in Gent, and a library, it's to me associated with books. However, the IT divisions in libraries are getting having more and more importance. But it's also a tool to make young people enthusiasts for literature, for example. If you have a nice website, if you have a good IC tools in order to enthusiasm people to read, for example, yeah, then, or like today, you're using PowerPoint with nice slides of nice books. And that's okay, isn't it?
For a total withdrawal from technology.
No, it's not. It's a matter of diversification. I think there is technology.
The point is, you don't get diversification as standard. What you've got is, look, has anyone seen that film Videodrome with David Cronenberg, 1983? It's basically a thing where, like the videos, there's this kind of cyber virus which passes via people watching stuff on videos. And, you know, the lead character played by James Woods is infected by this kind of brain virus, which psychedelically destroys his sense of reality and turns him into a kind of homicidal schizophrenic. I'm sure we can all relate to that. But at the end of it, the James Woods character says to the head of the company which has propagated this stuff, well, how come it doesn't affect you? And of course he goes, well, we don't watch it. You know, and I think that's the case, though. The people who are running the world, they're not sitting there with 3 screens, trust me. They don't sit there with 3 screens. They sit like Don Draper, with lots of free time available. Like, they want you to be running around in a state of panic, constantly, you know, reacting to things. They're pushing all the buttons. They're not doing that. They just want you to think they're doing that. And, you know, the point is that it doesn't come as standard. So that's what I mean about collective pragmatics of partial withdrawal. Like, that's what I mean about people who were nostalgic for, I think increasingly nostalgic for that period when the internet was a resource, aside from life, where you had your projects, you went to the internet to record some of those projects to get some resources. You didn't live in it all of the time. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, the standard mode clearly is one in which that is the case, where you're addicted first and then we have to withdraw from that. But I don't want to go back to face-to-face communication, organic, locally produced stuff. That's just a part.
So no slow movements,
no,
taking time?
The right time is consistency versus cut-up, I put it that way.
Yeah.
It's not about slow versus fast, because we've got a slow, fast world where we've got massive kind of speed of stuff coming into us, producing inertial glacial slowness in culture. And so slowness is not an alternative to it. It's already there. What we have is, in a way, the difference between cut-up as a constant mode of a kind of incoherent and stimuli which cannot be montaged together, you know, into a kind of totality, versus consistency. Well, consistency is, you know, where one can be absorbed, one can, an absorption time can feel really quick. When you're absorbed in something, when you're in a creative process or whatever, you feel something taken over you. That's, you know, you feel you're running to catch up with it. Time actually speeds up. I would say my sense of time we're all like computers now whose memory is overloaded. So everything's slow and creaky. Everything's slow and creaky. It's like living in London, where you just, where even walking down the street is an Odyssean quest. And there's an illusion because everyone's running around and something's happening there. But actually, they're running around. The more that people run around, the harder it is for anyone to actually get anything done, and the less you can achieve in time, I think. So that's what I would say about that. It's not about slow versus fast. It's about consistency and absorption.
Or what you call so nicely lucid explorations. Do we need versus urgencies? That's very nice. So, do you want to say it? Jeroen? Yeah. The microphone, where is he?
I just wanted to say, so what you're basically saying is that I guess your generation or the previous generation was better because you had more time to pursue your own projects, and you also think that you were more creative, or the previous generation was more creative?
Oh, without doubt, yeah.
I don't think that's true. I just think that...
Show me.
I just don't think that's true. I think that there is an information overload, definitely. I just think it's harder now to pick out the very essential, very new creative ideas. But I just think that there's just more information.
That's not an argument. Show me actual hard evidence of what you're saying. Show me a new creative thing that didn't exist in the 20th century that actually emerged.
Well, I mean,
one thing in the 21st century.
Like Steve Jobs, you said that you don't think that that's something innovative or creative or whatever.
No, it's a parasite.
But I think it's very creative. It's something evolutionary, something new.
Well, one that came from the 20th century. Two, a lot of that was funded by the state and not by him. He just was like a tiny part of that.
He wasn't young enough than me. But also, you're saying that
no Jobs is like a Christ figure. You can't really attack him. But he just could sell stuff. He didn't even design it.
I just think that it gets harder to pick out the very creative things because maybe in the previous generation you didn't have that much information, so it was easier to find the creative things in between the whole mass of information. And also now, you're saying that our generation is more depressed, and I don't disagree, but also maybe they're depressed just because there's so much information and we're creative, but we actually realize that a lot of different people think the same way that we do and have the same ideas. Because sometimes you start a project and you think oh wow, I found something new out, and then you go look on the internet and you saw 100 other people already thought of that too. But so maybe then it undermines your creativity in your head, but
okay. But let's be clear about what I'm saying. Creativity isn't a property of individuals, ever. It's a property of a social or collective scene. So it's not like the individuals are less creative than they used to be. That's just not how creativity works. Creativity is possible because of social conditions. And those social conditions have been removed, and all of the evidence, I would say, suggests that has had a massively deleterious effect on the production of novelty. Now, that argument is a fallacy. It's a basic fallacy to appeal to lack of contrary evidence, it's called, where you can say, well, there might be this stuff out there, but we haven't seen it yet. But you can say there might be fairies at the bottom of the garden, we just haven't seen them yet. Of course, I would say, that if there was, just point to me one thing in music. Let's say music alone, let's go on music. In the last 10 years, one single thing that couldn't have come out in the 20th century.
You're here in the conservatory, so
just one example.
There has to be somewhere in this building one thing.
It won't be. It is over. It's not and it's not a fault of. We can't go into free will. It's not the fault of people today that they're just not putting enough effort in. It's not that they have this thing creativity which others previously had, which they now don't have. No, it's that the conditions for creativity are social and collective, and they have been destroyed. And that's what we can't imagine that culture will reliably deliver the same level of intensity throughout all history. If we've got political complaints about neoliberalism, they should be, if you say neoliberalism's bad, we can't assume, we have to take this seriously. that is really bad, and that there's no sphere of life, culture, subjectivity, consciousness that is free of the effects of this political system. And that's and you know, we might not like it. I don't like it. I don't want to be saying what I'm saying now. Trust me. But there's nothing about us that was good or better than you or anybody. It's just that we were lucky and you're unlucky. You know, you live in the Hunger Games. We had social democracy. You know, like that's you know, that's like, you know, you should be angry about this, not kind of in this weird case of, I see with some people it's kind of temporal chauvinism, where you're kind of, you know, our time's just as good as any other time. It isn't. It's a bad time. But, you know, and part of what makes it bad is this weird positivity that people feel they have to be in. And there's definitely a relationship between that mandatory positivity that young people are required to have. Be cheerful, be positive, you know, make things for yourself, don't rely on all of this stuff, and the actual depression, which is clearly increasing amongst young people because they know they can't do those things. Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yes. I kind of get the feeling from hearing the two of you talk that sometimes you forget that we actually grew up in these massive changes. So I'm 24, I remember the computer, I remember the internet, getting introduced to our homes. I remember that. But at the same time, this was an exciting thing, and nobody knew what kind of effects that would be. And now it's like you expect us to get the whole concept and see all the flaws or have all the effects. Well, you basically say you got to wake up yourselves. Like, isn't it something the older generation should also take care of or hand us some tools, or like how do you suggest what should our younger generation do to wake up?
Well, I mean, I think like, you are the hope of everything. That's the point, that you can do things. I mean, but I mean, why ask me though? I mean, like years ago, I think this is part of the problem. That, you know, young people are leading edge of things, partly because they would take charge and set the agenda. Now, the very fact you're asking that question to if someone's gone wrong. Why are you asking me? I mean, you have to recover a sense of agency and control of the capacity for collective control of your own lives. But of course, I mean, I think that of course you're going to find that difficult because, you know, you may have seen the internet gradually introduced, but I mean, I know the situation is different in this country than the UK, but in the UK with young people, you know, young people your age and, you know, up to 30 or whatever have never seen anything, have never experienced anything that isn't neoliberal domination, or what I've called capitalist realism. And of course that's really depressing. And you know, this thing of alternatives. Of course, when we were growing up, there was a real alternative, or a feeling of many alternatives, right? There was the counterculture of the 60s, the wake of that, the sense of people trying to have alternatives to the family, of attacks on psychiatry, you know, the sense still in the air in the 70s that everything that we taken for granted about society.
But there was more authority, so that was easy to revolt.
There was the Soviet system, which for all its, you know, major problems, we lived in a world where there wasn't only one way of doing things. No, you know, you've lived in a world, most of you sort of people, like I say, 30 and younger, where that isn't the case anymore. You know, there's two major thresholds: the end of the 70s, where with the arrival of Reagan, Thatcher, Deng Xiaoping, all of that, and then the end, and then 89, the end of the Soviet system. Two major thresholds into a world in which capitalism becomes theoretically global, and if not actually global. And you know, that is depressing. Like the effects of that. You know, when the resources that are available to us, that we took for granted, but which we've gradually seen disappear, and you know, we're culpable. Like we're the generation, well, the generation above us are the real fuckers. But we've sort of let this slip away. Like in the 90s, you know, many of us just thought there's no point in politics anymore. You know, whatever, it's all cyber. Like, hey man, the states doesn't matter. All of this stuff. You know, I take responsibility for that we've let this slip away in lots of ways. But you know, I do think that there's a capacity now for things to change. I really strongly believe that this breakdown is coming in one way or another. Like we've seen glimmers of it. We've seen in 2011 around the world, like outburst of militancy, you know, from everywhere in the Middle East. You know, riots in London, whatever. We've seen these breakdowns. A new normal is restored. But the one thing we can say for certain about the future is that things can't go back to how they were before 2008. Capital has no solution to the problems that led up to 2008. Don't think that they know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. They're in a panic like everyone. Like you know, it's just a simple story. That how do they solve the key problem? The key problem with capitalism is how do you pay workers less all the time? Then the second problem is if you pay them almost nothing, then they can't buy the stuff. Okay, so how do they solve that? They solved it by debt. They solved that by debt. And that's the big story of neoliberalism. Underneath it is debt. But that all collapsed in 2008. That model collapsed, and they haven't got another one. They haven't got another one. The model is partly selling you. You have been sold out. You've been sold. You know, you will bear this debt. You will bear it. You know, you will have worse lives than us. That's the deal. Like, and this is what I mean by capitalist realism. Your lives will be worse than us, and that's just how things are now. I mean, part of the thing is you shouldn't accept this as the deal. You shouldn't accept that you're being sold out and like your future has been like, is in a form of debt. You'll bear this debt. Don't bear it. Don't accept it. And whatever ways you can have of not doing that, I think it's for you to invent them, though. I think partly.
Okay, Mark. I'm afraid we are running out of time. Is it fine with you? 2 more questions, short. And then we will continue the discussion within 2 weeks, because then Pedro de Bruiker is coming to talk about time and technology for young people. So we are not finished yet. But I'm afraid people have to go because it's 10 to 10, and there are a lot of people who have to catch trains and things like that. Please go ahead, shortly.
I am a computer engineer, and I have no smartphone. In my opinion, technology is misused for ridiculous things. I agree with that. But on the other hand, I see people doing ridiculous things that can be solved by technology. And that's my frustration. I think the key problem is the allocation of resources for implementing technology. So computer engineers developing Twitter. There's a misallocation of resources, in my opinion. I think you need a movement of people start using technology for things that really matter. Like medicine, like developing new political constructions. So I think there is an alternative. I am not as pessimistic as I think you are. And a little
short about.
I say I was negative, not pessimistic. I'm not pessimistic at all. I think, and also, let's just be clear, I'm not anti-technology. I'm at all. I think that you totally agree with you that solutions. It's the capture of certain form of communicative technology by the dominant form of capitalism that is the issue now. What would Soviet cyberspace have been like? Think about that. Like, I think there's lots of different ways in which we can imagine cyberspace working. It's the synergy, like I was talking about at the start, between particular form of communicative technology and the currently dominant kind of model of social relations. That is the issue for me. I think I totally agree with you. There's lots of technological solutions, including to work. You know, and we've got to go back to that problem of how can we work less and open up, you know, time for lucid explorations more. And that is partly to be solved by technology, without a doubt, and the proper management of resources and time, etc. Management is our thing. It's been, you know, is a left-wing thing. Management, a proper allocation of resources. This was stolen off us by neoliberals. And for their society, it's utterly chaotic and unplanned. And, you know, planning, security, etc., are actually the conditions for creativity and novelty, I would argue.
Okay, that was the very last one. there was one more person there, and he said, "I'll keep it for the next time."
Okay, I'm sorry.
I have an idea. Is that fine with you if we go to pub and have the discussion further there?
Yes, we can get
Yes,
drinks.
yes. I will try to find something to eat. So, people who feel like discuss further, we are going to Trefpunt, and there you can discuss further with Mark. And Mark Fisher, I want to thank you very much. It's clear that you have touched our young people.